Fine, welcome back. We will have a very quick look on the functions in Python. This will be not a very extensive introduction into Python function. That will be in a separate lecture later. Now I want to show you only the very basics in order so that we can start to write functions when we are solving the exercises. So basically the concept of the function is actually quite simple. You want to put a certain algorithm into a separate code block which can be written and tested independently from the rest, and this separate code block should communicate with the other parts of the code only through a well-defined interface. What does it mean? Let's assume I have a basic program which needs the factorial of 5 for some reasons. Then it would be nice if this program could call out to something. This something is the function, and pass it input information. The input information here is just very simple. The only thing this function has to know is that it should calculate the factorial of 5. So the only data it needs is the 5. Then the function should implement some kind of algorithm. It doesn't really matter which one from the outside, which calculates this number, the factorial of 5. And then it should return it to the main program. So basically there is an input of 5 and an output of 120, and what happens in between is basically not interesting from the point of the main program, right? As long as the function runs, the main program stops. So the main program basically queries a question and waits until the answer, and if the answer is there, then the main program can basically continue execution and process the results it got. So this is maybe the simplest way to introduce the concepts of functions. So how is such a function defined in Python? This function is defined in Python by the def keyword, as you can see here. The def keyword, then you have the factorial, the name of the function here, and then if this subroutine needs any kind of input data, any kind of arguments or parameters, then you would just put them into parentheses. Then once you have the function definition, you see that here is closed by a colon. That means it opens a block. That means whatever belongs to the function definition must be indented in Python accordingly by 4 characters. So it's super important. Everything which is part of the function is indented by 4 characters, which is a function block. And the first thing you write in a function is a so-called docstring, which is basically something which is not evaluated by Python, but it serves the documentation of the function and can be extracted with various tools or even by your graphical programming environment. And that you do by specifying 3 quotations, and then also here 3 quote signs at the end. And in between, you remember, if you have a string opened by 3 quotes, then the string can also contain new lines. And then here you can just enter the documentation of the function. There are various ways how you can do that, but you should use one of the established one. And in this course, and this is something I would also suggest to you, you should use the Google style of documentation. I think it's a very nice, a very readable, and also very human-friendly one. So basically, you have one block which is called args, with colon, and then even more indented you have the arguments, and so for every arguments you write what it is supposed, and then if the function returns a value, you have a returns block where you describe what is the thing what the function is supposed to return, right? And then once you have the documentation, then you write the function itself, and in our case the function block is super easy. This is just we are starting with a variable we call it result, which gets the value 1, and then we are multiplying it by a number starting from 2 and counting upwards until we are reaching basically the n, which is the factorial. Just to remind you, here I have not n but n plus 1, because you know the upper range in Python is always exclusive. But of course, if we are talking about the factorial of n, then we have to multiply this number also by n as the last one. Okay, that means we have the result, what we want to communicate back to the calling function in the variable result. And how can we communicate it back? We have to do it explicitly by saying return, that means stop execution, go back to the main program, and at the same time communicate back this value, this variable return result. Okay. How would the call look like in the main code? If I need the factorial of 5, then I'm just going in the function factorial and passing the number 5. the function would return 120 as a result, and that basically this call would be replaced by the value of 100, by the integer number 120, and that I assign to a name a accordingly. And then if I basically just print out the value of a, I would get accordingly 120. So this is how I call a function from the code, and on the left hand side you see how I define a function. Just want a few slight remarks on the arguments. So as we said, if this the return value, if you said if the function wants to return something, it have to has a return and the name of the variable which contains the value, or an expression which is the return expression. If the function needs arguments in order to make its job, like for example the number we should calculate the factorial of, then it should have arguments. Not just one argument, but arbitrary number of arguments is possible. So for example, if the function needs 2 arguments, then you can have 2 entities here. You should name them, of course, much better than a and b. Usually a and b are not that good name. I just used here for abbreviation because the place is somewhat short. But the main thing to learn here that the function can accept multiple parameters, and then of course when you call the function, then you have to provide accordingly multiple parameters, right? The return value is optional. Not all functions return a useful value. For example, if you are just writing a function which doesn't calculate everything, but just makes a side effect, which means, for example, print something, then of course the return value is not really interesting. The only reason why you call these functions in order to trigger some printing commands, and then the function doesn't have to return anything, so you don't have a return statement in this function. The function would return nevertheless, so when the last statement is reached and the function block is over, then the function would return to the caller. And because the function doesn't really deliver anything useful, we will see later that it's a non-type which it delivers, but at the moment it's not that interesting. It doesn't deliver anything useful, therefore there's also no reason to store the results, the return results, and therefore we just call the function here row without assigning the return value to any variable at the left hand side. Okay, and that should be actually already enough for you to start and write small functions when you solve the exercises.